Yeah, I'm Jackson. I have zero experience with carpentry.
I studied at a school for historic preservation in Boston and learned about how things were built, 250 years ago.
There's a long way to go. I'm nowhere near the top. Not that I thought I was, but there's so much more to do out there.
Welcome back to the Passion for Craft podcast. We are going over the 5 orders of architecture. I thought there were only 3 until we started talking about this concept. When I pitched this idea, I said we got to talk about the 3 orders of architecture. There are 5. So we're going to be looking at some photos today. This is going to be somewhat visual. So audio listeners, join the Patreon. We'd love to have you there so you can see kind of what we're talking about. YouTube clips. Glad you made it here. But we're talking about the 5 orders, and they kind of help with this language, this idea of a language around architecture. I'm going to pass it to the guys who know stuff, but that's kind of what we're going over today, and it's going to be a fun journey.
Yeah, we'll start with some lighthearted, looking at some photos where we try to guess, because I don't really know stuff. I know a little bit, but Brent can tell us what's wrong with these pictures, so why don't we just jump into it?
But I think one thing that we'll realize is that regardless of whether or not we do know stuff, we will be able to tell.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
We will be able to tell what is and what isn't bad.
And that's part of the language part of it, is if you read a good literary piece, you're like, wow, that read really well. Mm-hmm. It was the same thing with the building. Even though you may not be like an English major,
right, you
can still look at a badly written paper or something, you know. It's obvious. So a lot of these, I think, are going to be obvious.
Oh, game on.
Well, and one of the reasons I want to do this is that it can sometimes be confusing, and I think the reason why some of our customers don't want classicism in their things.
That's what this is called, classicism, right?
Yes.
I'm not being.
Yeah, it's the classical language, and so yes, classicism.
So the why your customers want classicism is what I didn't mean to cut you off.
Because it's done so poorly so often, and in a lot of these houses, they're mid-range houses done unfortunately, mm-hmm. and it causes you to look at it and go, yeah, I don't want that. Mm-hmm. So but when it's done well, it's magical, but too often it's done poorly, and so and here's the other piece of it. It's hard to, unless you're really into this stuff, it's really hard to sometimes pick out what's wrong. It's hard to say, well, the proportion of 1 to 7, it's like, no, you don't see it that way. In these examples, we'll have missing parts of it, right? They'll sometimes have a column without an entablature, or sometimes I think they'll be obvious, but let's, it's a learned thing, but when it's done right, it's awesome.
All right,
it can be intimidating to get into it too, and like you're kind of looking at the crowd like, oh, is that right? Or yeah, that's wrong. I knew it. But it'll become apparent, I think, as you go on.
Yeah.
All right,
Richard, we gonna have our usual $5,000 bet for this one, or
let's make the stakes a little higher.
All right, so what's wrong with this one?
The window above the door is wrong.
This is actually a job that I did. Just joking.
Well, we're going to have to blur the license plate. No, just kidding. It's
you
blurred
can't
enough.
Really see it.
It's blurred enough. I mean, I stand by what I say. The window above the door is wrong. That's weird.
Why is the window above the door wrong? Oh, you mean the transom?
I don't know what words you're speaking, but the one right above...
Like 6 inches above the door?
Yeah.
Okay, so what happens in the Texas market is Texas is the largest brick market in the country.
Okay.
Is that Mason and Mason salesmen sell bricks to do everything. And so what you find is that traditionally where the side lights, and a transom, which is what those thin lights are around this door, were typically divided by wood, and then brick would surround the whole opening. In this case, they have got brick where the wood is supposed to be, and so it looks goofy. So the reason why that transom looks weird, it's like it's frozen in a piece of stone over the door, it should be part of a whole unit that's drawn out of wood.
So there should be, just to wrap up what you just said, there's those 6 inches of brick that we're seeing there, that should be wood.
Correct.
Okay. And then should there be wood surrounding
Yes.
the window as well?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
yes. Traditionally, this is a solid masonry building with an infill of a doorway that includes side lights and everything else. In this case, they've got the door as a separate unit, and then they've got the windows set in a metal frame right inside the brick. It just looks goofy. And so the historic precedent we're not reminded of anything here, and so we end up looking at it going, oh, that's kind of weird. But what's wrong with the columns, which is the orders, which is what we're here to talk about?
Well, I don't like how the column, it's kind of off-putting how the column is right under the dormer. I don't know why that just kind of,
There's
is
no
that
spacing.
weird?
Well, let's just break it. Let's start first. What's the deal with the column?
It's not intisized.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so entasis, it's spelled Entasis. And I've heard the enunciation entasis and entasis, and
Both
I think
ways,
it's
your
entis.
emphasis is on the wrong syllable.
Yeah, I think it's entasis. So it's basically that the traditional column had a diminishing size as it grew taller, and usually about a third of the way up it was straight, but then it slowly diminishes to the top. Now,
Slopes inward.
yes, and so it's not really something you look at and go, oh, look, but it does catch your eye. It does help you see better, and so. And think about it naturally. Like the trees have a bigger trunk at the bottom than they do at the top, right? And so it's a natural form that we're used to seeing versus a mechanical tube.
Art image.
And I've seen it too in the Greek temples. In a little bit of studying that I've done, they show like Greek temples. It's not real. They're kind of a computer generated drawing of it without it, and it looks like bars, like prison bars. But when you add it, it's like, oh, it's opened up.
I've also heard that
that's interesting.
people will describe that there's an optical illusion. And then there's two straight tubes next to each other. It actually looks like the tubes,
They bulge out.
Yeah, they bulge out. And so there's some optical illusion pieces that they think was part of it as well. What's wrong with the entablature?
Okay, what's the entablature? Help me out.
Entablature is the beam across the top. It's basically what the column is supporting before it hits the roof.
I mean, I don't know about you, Richard, but to me that looks a little plain.
Well, I know you're talking about the entablature, but just before we leave the column, the capital and the base, those are the same, right?
They're matching. Yeah, they shouldn't be. So what's happening here? And I'll just because I see you guys looking at this going, trying to think about what's wrong, right?
It's off.
And you're
It's
knowing it's
definitely
off,
off.
but you're not really seeing it. But yes, the column, the proportion of that column, okay, and the proportion in the orders is broken out basically the width to the height. It's the same thing with that our body's done, that there's a foot, the dimension of your foot to your height. It's
like a noodle.
A male proportion is a 1:7, okay? This one's like a 1:15, okay? That the diameter to the number of diameters tall, it could be 1:20, right?
Yeah.
It's a really tall, thin column, okay? Which means that visually it can't support as much. It begins to look like a toothpick. And so the beauty of the architectural orders is that they express strength, and they express an ability to you should feel comfortable walking into these spaces, not feeling like it's about to fall down on you.
So it's like that house skipped leg day. It can't support what it's holding up,
Totally. So there's a mix of materials on this thing. The proportions are messed up, and so it isn't successfully executed, and so it doesn't communicate traditional Southern plantation type of architecture, which I think is what they're trying to do. It doesn't look traditional. It looks new, and it's unsuccessful. So what's wrong here?
This one has movement, but it's not entasis, right? It's just tapered.
It's tapered. Yeah, exactly. So this one from the bottom to the top tapers, but it doesn't really go up a third, and then so
it doesn't have enough of a straight point to it.
Right.
But also it looks like and maybe this is as a byproduct of the tapering rather than the entasis, but the bottom of it is like it almost looks like a car on cement blocks. You know what I mean?
So
the bottom looks way too big to me.
So that's the plinth. Okay, is usually the piece that the column sits on. Okay, in this case, the plinth can't figure out whether it wants to be a pedestal or a plinth, and so the pedestal.
So what's the difference?
When we get into the orders, it's basically broken up of three parts: the pedestal, the column, the entablature.
Okay.
The pedestal has three parts: the plinth, the dado, and the cap and the surbase. The column has three parts: the base, the shaft, the capital. The entablature has three parts: the architrave, the frieze, the cornice. The cornice has three parts, right? And so you'll see that there's a system, right?
There's a hierarchy.
Yes, there's a way of doing it. So those plinths, those bases they do look like a car on the cement blocks, right? I think that was a good analogy. The columns also are shrinking so much in size that they begin to look weak at the top. And so, in this case, we've got an entablature that is a little bit funky. Okay, it not only is the columns messed up, but that entablature is a series of steps as opposed to being a block that is supporting the roof. And so, you're supposed to have this architrave, which is architrave is king beam. Okay, that's the words broken out. And so it is the thing that spans the opening that expresses strength, and then the frieze and the cornice are part of the proportioning system. But in this case, that tapered, trim detail, which it's kind of an entablature, but you've got basically three cornices instead of having, an architrave, a frieze, and a cornice.
Yeah, and then a big no-no is repeating the same molding as a Cyma and a Corona.
Exactly.
And that's that little
what are
dental.
Those, a Cyma and a Corona?
Well, you've got in the cornice, you've got three parts: a bed mold, a Corona, and a Cyma. And so he's just saying you're doing the same parts over and over again.
So the fact that they repeated.
I guess it'd be a bed mold and a Cyma, right?
Yeah, bed mold's your thing, Corona's your flat, and then your Cyma.
So it's repeating a bed mold and a Cyma are the same.
And it shouldn't be the same thing. They should have different.
One should be, from what I know, one should be lifting up, right? And then one should be finishing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
and then the other thing that's weird about this house that strikes me is the door opening. It almost doesn't fit the thing, or like maybe the door is too small of a piece of that window, like the window's too large. I don't know. I can't figure out why that looks weird.
It is odd.
In this period of house, you have the 2-story entry hall, which is a big deal, and so that's part of that grand 2-story entry hall. That's part of that style. So if we're just going to stay on the columns and everything else here, in that classical system, what's missing here?
The architrave.
In today's construction with web trusses and things like that, we don't necessarily need to build the architrave, the full entablature around a column. So in this case, the guys are like, well, I don't need to build down because I can just support it right at the ceiling. And so you end up with there's no capital that looks like that. It looks like mold is growing at the top of that thing. You've got fluted columns that run all the way to the top.
It's like a toothpick.
Toothpick is the proportions are again 1-20, and so realize that in the classical system, 1-7 is the lowest, is the most beefy. 1-10, is about as dainty and light as they get. This is 1-20, right? Mm-hmm. So it's way past
It needs to either be wider or
and so
broken into two.
Yeah, and so does that porch even stick out far enough to be even you don't even really need it, right? And so they can't decide whether it's a porch or an overhang, right? And so you probably don't even need those columns there, and certainly don't need that many of them. Again, just unsuccessful. So here again, do you see that there's a pediment inside the pediment end? There is a broken pediment.
Yeah, it's like embossed looking.
Yeah, with curved broken pediment in the pediment.
Yeah.
Okay. And here's the classic example of these traditional things being, stickered onto the house to give it more tradition. Okay. And I suspect the conversation with the homeowner was, well, that triangle up there is really kind of boring. Can we do something to dress it up? Well, what do you want to do? Well, I really like this thing.
These.
I've seen these. These look good. And so you end up with basically that is a broken pediment entablature that would go over a front door of a house. Okay, now decorating the triangle of, the
It's like a gable end.
the gable end. And so it's just like, make up your mind. We have no entablature here, okay? This kind of, I do that whole thing on gable end returns and roofing the gable end returns.
The little roof.
Yeah, and this is what they've done here. They got afraid that they were going to have a water trap, and so they decided to just roof across that whole where your entablature should be, okay? They've just roofed across the front. So they don't know, they don't understand, how the parts and pieces go together. And here they are trying to build a traditional house, and they end up, and I think they had money, right? There's brick there. I mean, this is probably a $1 million or $2 million house, and
that's what I was going to say.
It's just executed so poorly, okay?
The saddest part of it is that it could have been done right.
Yes. Right. They
The
had
shutters
the money,
are
they
great
had the
for
money
me.
to do it right.
I'm a big fan of the shutters on this house.
I mean, every traditional detail is wrong here, right? Not only are those shutters glued to the face of the house,
But they're not even
but they're
tall
not even
enough
the right
for the
size
window.
to even cover the window.
They're a little lower than the window and taller.
Oh, it's not even. It's below the
It's
seal.
below the seal.
Right? And
Yeah.
so here you're just looking at examples of
Oh, that is horrible. I'm joking. I mean, by comparison,
this actually looks
though.
good, right?
Yeah, this is
yeah,
great.
This is one.
I know the guy
this
that
is the
did
job
this.
we did this.
Oh. I was like, wait a minute.
Look at where just real quick. Just look where the shutters
That's
are.
cool though that you said this is good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you knew it right away.
Well, I'm like, the things are. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with.
Well, and here's the order,
Nothing.
right? On the lower porch, you've got the column going up, and you've got an architrave, a pulvinated frieze that kind of curves out, and then a cornice. And then look what's happening above. You got a pedestal, incorporates the balustrade.
The balustrade, yeah.
The column sits on top of that, and then there's another entablature in front of that.
So-
Notice too that the size of the columns are changing as we go up,
Right.
Because you don't need as much strength. The lower ones are stronger. They don't need to hold about as much weight above.
So here's a little question just thrown in here. A lot of those like 1 to 20 houses that we were talking about, like 1 to 15 was one of the ones you were saying. Was it like
20. Yeah, 1 to 15.
you said
yeah.
when that first one you said was 1 to 15? Would it make sense, and would it be a good to add a balcony there in between, or does that, like, historically, does that not make sense?
No, there's a tradition of doing that, and
because then that would solve the problem, right?
Yeah.
That would break up
and
the.
who knows why they didn't do that, but yes, that
and then it would give a reason for columns being there, even, right?
Totally. Why is that one bad?
Well, it's cinder blocks again and straight, like
Well,
Richard
there's-
was saying earlier. Like the straight is bad.
There's nothing supporting it at the wall. Like you have these two columns supporting it out here.
Yeah, so typically in the classical tradition, you'd have a pilaster against the wall that supports that.
Like a half one, right?
Yeah.
So the
And
pilaster-
Oh,
Pilaster's
that's
a half
that's what a
column?
pilaster is. Yeah. Okay.
And so the other thing is that capital is the base. That's an attic base that's used as a capital. And so
Wait, what's it? Sorry.
well, the capital is the
base.
thing that crowns the top of a column,
Okay.
right? And so that design for that capital is actually an attic base. It's called an attic base because there's two steps there.
So it
So it
should be
goes at
used
the
as a
bottom.
base.
Yeah, it should be at
used
the
as
base.
bottom.
And
But
then
they've
they
put it on
don't-
the top.
Yeah, and then that base isn't really a base. And so
Well, and then do you even need columns for that?
I don't know. They're trying to express the entry and trying to define, show where the entry is.
Got it.
But yeah, I mean, again, it's just kind of a mess.
That
What are the
pedestal is giant too, right?
Giant. Yeah, and that's, typically there's a relationship between the size of the pedestal and the column, in that the base, the width of the column pedestal and the column at the top at the base are the same size. In this case, this pedestal plinth is 2.5 times the size of the bottom of the column, and so
Yeah.
they look too big. Like they look like that column should be 3 times larger for that base.
And it's even weirder to see the same size at the top of the column as the bottom, because it just feels weird. The other thing that I've noticed just in a lot of the good houses that you've shown me over the years, Dad, is whenever there's a bad house, it doesn't. There are pieces of it that just don't blend together quite well. And so if you look where the rain gutter falls down to the side of the house, there's like a complete stop of what they were trying to do with that entry. and then there's like a little continuation
that
of
transition.
the bricks that's weird, and it
Really
just didn't
weird
transition right.
I don't even like how that it's the same thing, but on the
Yeah.
other side, how it comes into the middle of that.
And when that's executed well, right, those things should all work together.
Yeah.
So here's where two houses that were built in an older neighborhood later, okay, and
Both of these were okay,
and built very closely together. The house on the left is the house on the right, just executed with
modern ideas.
Yeah, with instead of columns they used brick, and instead of shingles they used raised seam metal, but and instead of double hung windows they're just open glass.
I mean, it looks like a kid with toothpicks in his mouth trying to be a walrus on the left.
It does look like a walrus. What's wrong with those dormers, right?
Which part's the dormer? Sorry.
The dormer's the window on the roof.
Well, it has the funky gable end returns.
Yeah, it's got the bad gable end returns, but look how big it is
It's
compared to
too
the window.
wide.
Yeah, it's just you got two windows below. That should be the proportion piece that is defining how big those windows should be, and they're just way too massive.
From what I understand, the width of the dormer is basically the width of the window, and then a casing on each side.
Barely enough for casing on each side.
So I just can't figure out. I'm trying to have.
I guess I'm just wondering visually, do you see those as being too big for this house?
Yeah, but I'm trying to understand what's wrong with it. Like, is it the things on the side that's wrong? Does the window need to be bigger
show 'em a
or
good
smaller?
one.
Or?
It's the roof is. I mean, there's a lot of things I would change.
It almost goes up to the main roof line too.
Yeah.
I think the pitch of that roof is too steep. I think the gable end returns, the scale of the window size to the face of the dormer, I think needs to be 80% glass compared to wood, and this is about 50-50.
Okay.
And so it ends up, that window looks really small inside that big wide thing, and it should be
a lot more window.
Yeah.
It should be the glass of that should be the main feature.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they got gable end returns, and so the overhangs for that dormer, they're nearly the same size as the house, and so it ends up looking heavy and big. And so,
talk to me about this triangle shape I'm seeing.
So that's
on the main house.
If you,
I know it's not.
If you look at pediments, and if you look at temple fronts, and if you look at kind of the classical tradition, the pitch of that roof is usually like 22 and a half. In that range, a very low pitch. Okay, this is here.
Oh, yeah.
There's
Okay,
the
Just
Parthenon.
gently
Gentle,
going out.
Yeah.
What is that? A 90? Like a 45?
It's a 45 up there, and so
That's
really,
a 60.
this shows up in
60,
Victorian
60.
architecture, in vernacular architecture, and so it doesn't really have a classical story. It's a, it's just not done very well.
Yeah.
And so that this would look more classical, more traditional if that pitch was lower. Same thing on those dormers. And so, I've fixed houses like this where I've taken that pitch out of there to help fix it. Here is look at the two columns on the end, right? That porch isn't bad, okay? In that you've got these large, brick piers and stuff that are supporting. Here's the problem I have with that, is that in the classical tradition, you would open up, make wider the entry and not wider the sides. So you're essentially inviting them to walk over the shrubs, right? If there wasn't that sidewalk there, because that's the more important thing, because it's wider.
Yeah.
And yet now you have the most important thing being the thinner one, and so it can. And this is all subconsciously. You end up kind of feeling like you're walking through a tight, narrow space, especially when you've got big, wide spaces on either side. So if you look in classical tradition, and it's hard to see on buildings, we'll probably see it on that Thomas Jefferson thing, but they actually measure the width of those columns, and it's 6 inches, maybe it's a foot. But it is a subtle difference to let you know where you're supposed to enter.
And that's an easy correction. You just do the math and you just divide it into the bigger ones.
Yeah. It's simple to do.
It's easy.
And well,
we didn't get the most obvious thing in this one. Is
by the
that
way, if
on
you're
the roof, you have two columns. This proves that people look at the traditional stuff as a sticker that they can put onto their thing for more tradition. I mean, if you zoomed into that, right, the capital on that, column isn't supporting anything, right? The left edge of it on the left side is floating.
It may barely touch the window.
It might barely touch the wood, which is what you would think it's supposed to support. They didn't even go so far as like put a corbel or a bracket in there that it supports.
Or to slant it either.
Yeah. It reminds me of like in video games when you can create your own like level. You're just like, click that there.
Yeah, they just click, held, and drag what was intended for a Coliseum level later on.
But I think people get the idea of that, these classical things are a sticker, that they aren't following the rules, that they're missing parts and pieces, the entablatures are gone, or the columns are too thin. And so there's a lot of misses there. Mm-hmm. And so, I believe that I could take some of these houses and just re-execute and in fact, my recent videos on YouTube, on the Wednesday design videos, that's all I'm doing is I'm taking, these people are reaching out to me saying, hey, can you help me fix my house? Something's not right is typically what they're saying. And then all I'm doing is I'm taking a column or I'm taking an entablature and I'm making it traditionally correct. And it just magically changes and transforms these houses. And that's how simple these things are, but they're hard to see sometimes.
Well, those are some of my favorite videos that you just recently started, and it is magic because I'm kind of looking at the thing they sent you, and I'm like, I mean, it's not bad, but then you do your thing, and I'm like, oh, that's what it could be, and I think that's the part that takes the time, the developing of like, where you can look at a thing like this, and I mean, before I even knew about any of this stuff, I probably wouldn't have even thought about it, But now I look at it, I'm like, whoa, yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, it's training your eye to this thing, and so the beauty of this system, the beauty of this, and the reason why I think it has some value and it works, okay, is because these were, architectural traditions that the Greeks and the Romans really, worked out. I mean, they learned it from the Egyptians, and their building style, when they had to build their temples out of stone, required a pier, a column, and it supports a roof, right? So the tectonics, the how it's put together makes sense. That we need to span this opening, and we need to have these things, and we need to span it, and how do we span it? What does that span look like? And so slowly and over time they developed these. Hey, this one looks better than this. I wonder why. Okay, well, look at the proportions there. That let's make this kind of a new standard. This works better than that. And so over the hundreds of years that they did this, we ended up, and it's thought that they took original wood forms and made them into stone. So we're looking at Corinthian order on the right, or the Ionic. They think it comes from wood forms. So first part is it develops from a natural building system. Okay. And it's not made up. It's not someone's fantasy of what should be or anything else. Two, there is, as they continued to work it out, it began to work with different building styles and have a personality and gender. And so Vitruvius, the only writer from the classical age that whose books survived into the Renaissance, wrote about the gender of the styles, and that the Tuscan Doric order 1 to 7 is a masculine order. It's a heavy, strong order. And the Corinthian order is a female, young maiden order. And I've had people look at buildings that are classically done, and you have the Tuscan order on the bottom, the Ionic, and then the Corinthian, and the most decorations way up the top there. And they'll look at it today and go, well, why wouldn't they bring the decoration down there so we can see it? It wasn't about that. It was about strength and being able to visually that strong, hefty, thick order can support more than that light, dainty order. So it's no wonder you don't put that up there. And then, buildings that have personality, like an armory, would be done in the Tuscan or Doric order, very masculine, strong, unornamented, whereas a palace would be done in the Corinthian order.
Well, and I'm sure there's an element to it where
look at that one.
Also you're trying to draw your eyes up. Right? Like you're trying to, there's some marvel to being drawn upward and wanting to look up high and see, wow, like what a cool creation, rather than just Yeah.
Well, and a lot of these temples and stuff were done with like religious thought in mind,
Right.
to like look up to
To
God.
the heavens. Yeah.
Yeah, true. So anyway, so the order, that's the background on the order of kind of where it came from. But the second piece of the order is that,
And we've been talking about it, and there's 5 of them. Can you run me through just before you jump into your next point, just the general overview of the 5?
In the Greek period, okay, there's 3, okay, and they come from different regions of Greece, okay. The Athens is the Ionic orders. That's where that comes from.
Okay.
Doric is Dori. They thought that's where the Spartans come from.
Obviously.
And so you see the personality of the Spartans, right, in that Doric order. The Ionic is the Athenians were scholarly, intellectual. Scrolls. And then Corinth is a very rich and wealthy place. And so there was 3 orders in their tradition, okay?
Fascinating.
Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. The Romans inherited, okay, and they really have an order, the Tuscan order, okay, because Tuscany is a rural farming area, and so they have 3 too, okay. Now, and then it's not until the Renaissance that the Renaissance artists are looking back at Greek and Rome, and they go, there's really 5 orders, okay? So the Greeks and Romans didn't look at it, they're like, there's 5 orders. It wasn't until the Renaissance, as they were studying the ancient buildings, that they came up with 5 orders, okay? Mm-hmm. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. So the 5 orders, we've got Tuscan, and that's like very basic, like
very simple.
Level 1 simple.
Yeah, farm buildings, armories,
And then we advance on just a little bit further to Doric, which is a little more ornate.
And the proportions. Yes, and the proportions of Doric and Tuscan are fairly similar, that 1 to 7.
And then after that, we go to Ionic, which is more like intellectual. That came from Athens.
Well,
it's got the scrolls.
Yeah, the scrolls are thought to be maybe the young lady's hair pulled up and stuff like that.
Nice.
The curls of the hair.
And then Corinthian, which is more Corinth, decorative, decadent, pretty, beautiful.
Yeah.
And then, the last one, composite. I don't understand that one.
Well, you can see that it's a combination of Ionic and Corinthian.
So that one,
so it's a composite of 2.
More, better?
Yeah.
Okay.
The highest.
Because more decoration, more things, the cooler.
But I mean, think about it this way. The greatest Greek temple, okay, the Parthenon, is in the Doric order, right? It's a low order. Now, the Romans, the Romans, they do a lot of their buildings in the Corinthian order, okay? The Greeks didn't do that as much. And so the Pantheon that we looked at earlier, it's in the Corinthian order. And so their nice temples were done that way. In my mind, these are, and the beauty of them today is they are proportioning systems, okay? There are ways for us to think about how to put moldings into a house, how to organize, and to ignore them is to ignore 2,000 years of building history and 2,000 years of people working these systems out and working out all the parts and pieces. And then, my recent research into the moldings in going back to the 1740s is those guys cared a great deal about how everything was proportioned. They look at a molding and go, okay, well, that little fillet is a 1 to 7 of this whole thing, and that's 3 parts here and 2 parts there and 1 part there. I mean, it's almost insane how careful they were.
It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not on TikTok. I heard of studying some of this stuff. I heard a really cool story about the Corinthian capital, the one of the young virgin who died. And the lady who took care of her put a basket of her belongings on her grave, and that acanthus leaf grew up around it. So an artist came by and drew it, and apparently that's how they got the Corinthian
that's the story,
capital.
That it was
that
it was a inspiration of seeing the basket and the acanthus leaf.
Yeah.
And realized if you look at an acanthus leaf today, it's a stylized acanthus leaf. It's not the actual acanthus leaf, but it's a stylized version of it that works very beautifully.
But you're right. You can't reject this. It's a language, and it's already been. It's like why reinvent the wheel when masters before have already built this language? If we learn this language and apply it just like a real vernacular language that you would speak, I mean, you could do anything.
I'm going to show you a bunch of slides, and a lot of this can be learned from the ICAA, which is the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. Great teaching organization where you can learn about these rules, and they have videos, and you can really dig into their archives, learn a lot of this. But look what's happening here, okay? This is from 1742. The divisions of the general parts of the Tuscan order, pedestal, and its parts at large, okay? So basically, they on the far left, you have the Tuscan order with the pedestal, the column, and then tablature at the top. And what they're doing is that you'll see all those numbers across there, and you'll see the numbers in the middle, and we're not going to dig into all that, but you do see, right, 1 to 7. 1 to 7. Okay, that's 7 counting up to the top. And then if you look at that rusticated column, which is right next to that, each of those pieces is a part of the column, so there's the proportional divide. And then look over at the pedestal and the parts there and the circle and the base. What they're doing, what's going on is that these ancient ancient pattern book authors were going back to Palladio, going back to the Renaissance, looking at the way these architectural orders were proportioned. So what Palladio did was he went to Rome like 5 or 6 times to measure, okay? And he was actually the ruins of Rome, okay? He was actually going to the ruins and measuring the base and measuring the thing and measuring the column, measuring the shaft, measuring the entablature to figure out what the Romans had done. Mm-hmm. And so he basically broke out or studied all the different parts and pieces so that he could build this proportioning system and understand it. And so what you see here is this is an ICAA document, the layout of the Doric order, okay? So that simple, easy order. Mm-hmm. But look at all the on the left it says 5 parts, okay? So the order is broken into 5 parts, okay? So the column is a 1 to 8, okay? And it varies. Some of the temples that they studied was 1 to 8 in the Doric order. Some was 1 to 7. So these aren't hard and fast rules. Okay, these.
Oh, column 8D.
Yeah, and so
the capital is 1.
And the capital is a half D, and the base is a half D. Mm-hmm. And so if you understood what the dimension of your column diameter was, you could actually lay out what your baseboard is, what your crown is, what your everything is.
Throughout the whole house. And so this proportioning system broken out like this. So now they've dove into the column, right? Mm-hmm. Now this is just the column. And notice that the torus and the fillet and that every piece on that thing is broken out. Mm-hmm. And the reason why those ancient pattern book authors could break out a molding and go, this crown molding is 7 parts, but that fillet is 1 part and the cushioning is 3 parts, is because they saw that these guys did it. Right.
And so that the ancients did it. And so I'm explaining all this, okay, because each order has a proportioning system. Each order has a list of details that you can study and understand to begin to proportion a room. Now,
even the flutes.
Exactly. And if you went back to what it means is that if you go to a room and you have a 10-foot tall room and it's broken in, say you're doing the Doric order or the Ionic order, it's 19 parts. So you could actually break out this wall into 19 parts and actually break out proportionally how tall your crown's supposed to be, how tall your base is. Wow. So you can actually use it to actually help you design and build moldings and lay out the wall. How high is my wainscot? How tall is my base? What's my crown look like?
Is that what you actually do on jobs too, right?
Yeah, and so yes, I do that from time to time. But I've just like your eyes getting accustomed to it. My eyes accustomed to it now, where I know things aren't right, and you can just walk in and go, "Yeah, that's too high," or that's not working, or that. And so a lot of it is
probably makes you fun at parties.
You're just dismantling the room. This place sucks.
Look at the crown they did. Oh my gosh. How embarrassing for them.
How embarrassing.
He holds it all in. He screams on the way home.
And so it isn't like if I took you into 3 rooms, okay, and said, what's wrong with these 3 rooms? And you guys might go, I don't know, but that one's really bad. This one's okay. And I like that one. You would most likely be right. And so these aren't.
And that's not because we're wizards it's because we innately know.
Because your eye sees it, right? And so just like we were looking at your shutters or columns, whatever we were earlier, now your eye sees it. You can't unsee it later. And you just start going, they didn't miss that. They missed that one. Or actually, this is a beautiful room. Well executed. I love it. Right.
Well, who was the guy you just, he went and measured the Roman ruins? Palladio. He had to go basically re-unlock the code, right? Because everything was in ruins.
So a lot of those Renaissance artists were doing that, okay? His book is the most famous because what he also did was he then applied it to new buildings at his time. So the Palladian country house, which England copied so much and then U.S. copied, was because Palladio not only did a study of the ancient ruins, but then applied it to a new building style. And so if you go to Vicentia, which is outside of Venice, which is where all the country houses were built, where he did all his stuff, you'll see the examples of this new type of farmhouse that had the piano nobile, which is that noble floor that is above the working area. So these things have this long working area underneath, and then the nice house above. So it's a combination of living house where you could entertain and do stuff, but also a working farm. And so Monticello is a Palladian village. You just don't see the working area because it's underneath. And so that's why Palladio did what he did. There was other people who were studying the Alberti and all everybody was enraptured by the book, Vitruvius's book. When they discovered it, was like, oh my gosh, this unlocks the secrets to ancient Rome. And so Alberti, Da Vinci, Palladio, everybody was studying that, going, oh my gosh, this is the Villa Rotunda, right? And so the reason you're going up those stairs to the main part of the house is because the working part of the house was underneath. That's what you see underneath there. So these were farms, right? These were farmhouses, and he invented this new style that has elegance and function, right? And so that's why he was so famous.
That's a farm. That's considered a farmhouse. Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I doubt there's any shiplap in there. But.
Chip and Joanna hadn't been there yet.
Yeah, they'll get there.
Can you imagine HGTV just like, we're gonna flip this?
They're calling up Italy. Hey,
yeah. So in any case, if we're talking about the orders, why does it matter? Why should I care? Okay. We looked at those examples earlier, that there are some basic functional things that you should have, in your order. The one I've done videos, and I don't think people get it, but I'm just like, quit putting the column flat up against the roof, right? At least include the parts there where you get an entablature that supports the roof visually. Even though I recognize you don't need, for today's building with trusses and everything else, the entablature, it looks better, right? And so
they're missing a whole half D.
If at least you... it's more than half D.
No, the entablature is a half D and the base
capital.
is a half D. Oh, okay.
The
Capital is
capital.
a half D.
Knucklehead. Yeah, it's like 2 3/4 D. So just so for those counting at home.
Oh, we're good math.
And so look, you want to be a master builder, right? You want to have the passion for craft. You want to understand our building tradition. You want to understand, why things are beautiful and why things aren't. That's why you need to understand the 5 orders. That's why you need to have a working knowledge of this stuff so that you're not a nincompoop. You're not a neophyte, right? So that master builder. What did he know? He understood why that's beautiful, right? He understood what Jefferson was copying, right? What was Jefferson copying?
The Greeks, the Romans.
Palladio.
On that building right there, what was he copying?
Palladio.
The Parthenon. That's the Parthenon. Right, that is the rotunda behind and the pediment in front.
Oh yeah, of course.
That is that. And
does it have an inscription even? Like
I'm not seeing one.
Oh.
And what about right? And so and then what was Villa Rotunda? What was it copying?
Palladio. Oh no, okay.
The Villa Rotunda is
Palladio.
Is the exact same thing, right? It's that pediment in front with the dome behind, and so. There's this building tradition that when you see it, you're like, oh yeah, he was copying that. He was inspired by that. He was looking at that, and
that was built 300 years ago, which is wild.
Well, it's what's the best analogy I can come up with is like it is a language of architecture.
So here's the deal. This is what's awesome. Okay, the Parthenon. Okay, 2,000 years ago,
Yeah.
right? Villa Rotunda,
1,000.
600 years ago. The Rotunda, 200 years ago.
Yep.
They're all looking at the same thing. They're all looking back at the Romans and going, that's a pretty good building. That was pretty good design. That was cool the way they did that. And
Can you imagine
everybody
being the guy?
inspired. They're all a little bit different, right? And
Yeah.
They're all based on that same
Ideas.
and
The orders.
still finding inspiration after hundreds of years. And so you shouldn't ignore this or ignore it at your own peril.
I mean, the other part about this is this is pretty. Like,
Well, that's
wow.
the thing when you learn. That's what I was gonna say. If you learn a language, like the first thing you learn when you're a kid is like the alphabet, how to put words together. I feel like one of the first things we should learn as builders is the language of architecture, because I feel like today, a lot of the buildings are done in like text talk, like
Yeah.
LOL. Like that's not literary writing,
Yeah.
But I think what's cool about this, what you just said, is like there's no fear of plagiarism either. Like this guy copied, and it's just everyone appreciates
and they're
it.
all
Yeah.
different. Like you guys didn't recognize that was a copy of Villa Rotunda.
No, totally.
And you go,
Well,
it's just a beautiful building.
A lot of the things that do that, like I was just noticing, that one obviously had a lot more glasswork. That one has a lot more brickwork. It has a lot more like woodwork. Like
More
it's,
windows
It's
and everything
cool.
else.
Like it.
Well, I mean, just so you know, the lawn, which is what this is called, it's a huge, vast lawn that
That's
stretches
the best
out.
one. Oh.
That the rotunda's at the top, right? Symbolically, you have these houses where the teachers lived. You have these areas where the students lived. It was voted the most beautiful, architectural creation in America.
I mean, you'd be a fool to say anything else
so
beats it. I mean,
it's
golly.
so wonderful.
There's so many buildings that are so uniform.
Symbolically, it's great. Architecturally, it's great. Anyway, it's as we talk about the orders, it was just like, what's the best example of that? And the other thing is that Jefferson was loved all of this. Okay. Palladio was his Bible. He said a number of times, and he had, 2 or 3 copies of it. And so he was looking to the past as well. And, the fact that Jefferson created this, and we're going to have a whole thing on Jefferson as an architect.
Yeah.
But this was awesome. So, I mean, I guess I look at the orders, and you wanted to do one of the orders. And I was like, I'm glad we did, because I do think it is foundational. I do think it is, one of those things that no one's going to teach you this, right? No one's there aren't really any books on here's your guide to the orders, and
Why not?
You need to do that.
Yeah, I get that.
Yet it is so awesome and foundational and important that we all should understand this. I wish homeowners understood it.
I mean, this was one of the things that got me interested in architecture. We were in, I don't remember where we were, Virginia, maybe?
Maybe.
On some family vacation. He was speaking at a builders expo, and you started explaining like what order is that? What is that? And he at the time explained that there were 3 to us. There was like Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian. And so he would we'd be
Not
walking
in that order.
Yeah. But we'd be walking around town, and he's like, "What order is that?" I got the orders out of order. What order is that? And me, Gigi, and Harriet, my sisters, were like, Corinthian. And he's like, well, yeah, technically it's composite. And you're like, all right, what's composite? But it was a whole deal where we got to, guess and try and figure it out, which got me interested in architecture. It was one of the first times I was like, all right, shut up, old man. You don't know much about architecture. Or you don't know how to make architecture interesting. Now, and that really brought me into it and made me really interested in this and curious to learn more, which is one of the reasons I wanted people to hear about it.
My biggest takeaway from this is why reinvent the wheel? Like, these things are already laid out. The code's been unlocked.
Yeah.
Let's use it and apply it. And why do I like the way this thing looks? Like when he threw us that curveball of the house, the Georgian house that you guys built. I mean, immediately it's like, whoa, cool. You know, that looks amazing.
I think a stark contrast really helped that one out.
Yeah.
Right? We had some really bad ones to contrast it.
The thing that has been driven home to me, I just did a video on it. It's not out yet, on what the builders of the past knew and why are their rooms more beautiful than ours. Just now having studied their pattern books for the last number of months, that's all they wrote about. That's all they talked about, and they broke it down. And you talk about why reinvent the wheel, and that's right. The other piece of that though is we're barely even scratching the surface of what we know and what we understand, what we remember. And so there is a deep well of information there that if people would, go down 2 steps into, a 100-step thing, we're probably half a step into it. Literally, I don't think we're even scratching the surface of what, the guys in the past used to know.
That'd be beneficial. Dig into it.
Yep.
You'll enjoy it. I did. I would do. I mean, I'm still looking into all that.
Yeah, me too.
If you want to see more terrible examples of awful building, great awful buildsmanship, we're going to throw them in our Discord. So join the Patreon in order to get access to that. If you want to join at a higher tier, you'll get access to some awesome peeks into the past from Brent and then some practical applications of those from Richard. And always you can join in at a higher level and speak to them and pick their brains as to how to do something on a job site.
Just one thing to add.
Yeah.
For those of you who've been asking for a Buildmanship t-shirt, we have worked up a few things. Let us know if you're interested in that because we do have a few ideas for the Buildmanship.
Yeah.
Only available to apprentices.
Yes.
Yeah. It only should be. All right. Well, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.